Welcome back to the War Room, powered by Draft HQ and Prep Baseball, where we break down everything from amateur scouting to front office strategy, all with an eye on the next wave of elite talent. I'm Shooter Hunt, and today we've got a special guest joining us inside the War Room, someone who lives at the cutting edge of player development and data-driven evaluation, Lance Brozdowski, a player development analyst for Marquee Sports, and the man who you will be locked in on during the MLB draft because he'll be providing all the coverage. Lance, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Shooter. Great to meet you, man. This will be fun.
I have been a huge fanboy. We were talking about for over a year now. Ran into some of your data stuff, and I was telling you, a lot of times during the holidays, I finally get a chance to breathe, where I can do some research, fall into like the YouTube rabbit holes. And I fell into your rabbit hole, and I swear for 2 days I was just watching. Like, this is incredible content, just going throughout the whole deal. And for those of you out there, please go check it out on YouTube, because the Lance Brozdowski channel has all sorts of insight. And even more important, Lance, I am a simpleton. I have a very simple mind. You made it easily digestible for me. And I wrote down actually a note: you are not condescending, but enlightening. And it was really awesome to like watch your stuff. So thank you so much for it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the YouTube's been a fun project. Honestly, I'll be totally honest. Like, the majority of the stuff that I put out there is really my way to like get reps, basically, when I then do stuff for like TV or anything along those lines. So sometimes I have like incomplete thoughts in there. Like, I have a video coming out soon on like pitcher's extension and how that like factors into a total package of like what the guy's fingerprint is, and I like do a little bit of sourcing usually, and then I'll make the video, and then usually I get a good amount of reaction to it from various people, and then I learn more. So it's like this hilarious flow that like it's just turned into content, and it serves multiple purposes. It's grown a small audience, and it also just helps me try to just like, I think by teaching you learn, and I try to do that as much as possible.
Yeah, you're getting your 10,000 reps and you're putting this stuff out. And I think that's why it probably comes across so easily accessible and obtainable, and for me to digest, is the fact that you enjoy it. Like, you're putting out stuff that you like to learn about, and more than anything, you're putting out some zany stuff that I love to think about, like what's coming next, what's the next wave, where do you come up with the ideas, or like, let's go back. Where did your love for baseball come from? Where did that originate?
Yeah, I grew up playing. My dad grew up playing as well, so it's just always been in my family. I wasn't particularly good. I played all through high school, but I didn't end up playing in college. I grew a little late, which is always my excuse. So I'm like kind of tall now, but going into like my freshman year of college, I was like really thin and like sub 6 feet. And then I shot up like 4 or 5 inches in my freshman year. And I was like, wow, I wish I had that 2 years earlier when I was like a sophomore in high school and I could have played. But yeah, I mean, I went to a bunch of minor league games when I was younger, a bunch of teams that are now extinct, like New Haven Ravens, if anyone's from Connecticut.
Oh yeah,
East Coast area. Yeah, they're defunct now, but that was like one of the first baseball games I ever went to. The New Britain Rockcats is then what migrated over. We went there. So I've grown up on the minor leagues. And I think as I've grown in this industry, I've always been comfortable with numbers, and I really think contextualizing a lot of what's going on the prospect side, and also applying it back up to the major league level, is just really fun for me. And again, like, it seems like it's fun for other people. So I try to really keep my content in that window of like, I want to enjoy it. I want to enjoy doing it, and I want to learn from it. So that's where the love comes from.
It's amazing. So you dive into that stuff. I know you did some stuff with Driveline. You go into all of this. You're putting out like incredible content. I'm rolling down the entire MLB trend analysis, because for us at Prep Baseball, we are scouts, right? We're continually going out there and scouting the game, especially from the amateur side leading up towards the draft, and trying to figure out what can we be better at? Where are teams headed? And like, this is probably a decade, maybe 2 decades ago, you start looking at what Driveline was at the cutting edge of, and then you start looking at, all of a sudden, the radar gun becomes the RPMs. The RPMs become the induced vert. The induced vert becomes the plate height. And everything kind of takes that next wave to where we're going. We've added our TrackMan, blast motion, whatever it may be. So I'm always trying to find out what's next. And there's certain professional teams that do a better job than others. There are the haves and have-nots. How have you been able to discover, hey, this is a cool aspect of, I'm looking at like some of the Yankees pitching lab stuff, which I'm a Yankee fan, full disclosure. I'm a Yankee fan. So I'm looking at a lot of stuff like that. Where do you find that information? And then how do you go down the same rabbit holes of like, I'm going to find out more about this, and this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple off seasons ago, what I ended up doing was, so it's funny, like when I went to grad school for journalism, which is kind of how the media stuff's come about.
Okay.
That's always been the angle that I wanted to go. You know, I poked around in some organizations and stuff, and had some interest, but I just really enjoy the communication side, and it's allowed me to have better conversations with people in organizations, knowing that I'm not directly competing with them. But a couple off seasons ago, this is kind of funny. I just was like really honed in when Twitter was not the cesspool it kind of is now. Anyone that followed me that had like a baseball affiliation, I would put into a list. And then I spent like an entire off season or two, like just trying to connect with as many people as possible, particularly those in major league orgs. And I did this because I didn't really, this is funny. And I wanted to be like a newsbreaker. And I started talking to agents, but I felt like so burdened in those conversations because like my intent was just like, can you tell me where your player's signing? It's like, I want to be a newsbreaker. Yeah. I think that's how you do it. And I regretted those calls. Like I just did not like them. I would wake up and see like, oh, I got 2 calls on my schedule with agents. And it's like, I don't know, man. Like I hated them. And I didn't hate the agents. I just hated having those conversations because I didn't like bring anything to the table, you know? And then what transformed into was more me talking to like coordinators, directors of pitching now, people in those decision-making angles on the pitching side in particular, and obviously some hitting people as well. But that is what I like love doing. I love talking to those people. And I was always really excited for those convos. And that's, I think, where a lot of this information's come from. I have some sources in Ori that are kind enough to send me some of the more aggregated minor league data that helps me kind of like really zoom out. And I find it valuable, honestly, to bring that data to people I talk to, because I don't know how many orgs like look at that zoomed out, you know, on like, org, like maybe they do from a KPI standpoint of like, we want our K-minus walk to be this. We want our fastball velo to be this. It's got to go up. Our stuff, you know, that's a big thing teams look at internally is like, is our stuff score improving year over year? Where are we relative to the league? But yeah, I really enjoy those convos. And I'd say that's where a lot of this like poking comes from. It's like someone will bring something up and I'll poke with someone else. I've found that you often get better info when you ask about other organizations than the person. My favorite part. It's like, so what do you think about the Rays? If I'm talking to like a Red Sox person or something like that. We're doing this and this, and we hate this, and it's like, great, this is what I want, you know?
It's amazing. I find that even in the collegiate level where it's been an arms race of like getting this pitching lab, that pitching lab, where, and I don't know if you've seen this professionally, but, oh yeah, we have all that stuff. And I'll be like, but you don't know how to use it. Or you have all the access and you're spending all the money, but there's no conduit to actually connect it to your players. How often do you see that with pro clubs?
It's a great point. I think the sharpest orgs now are so ahead that like they've used stuff as probably a baseline, you know, like that's distillation of release height, velo, shape, etc., and all that stuff. Like they're using that as some bit of baseline. But I think because those are so ubiquitous now, like the edge is probably not in stuff anymore. It's probably in like understanding where the stuff model might be wrong. For example, like we have some public stuff models now, and you can see the differentials sometimes of like really good stuff, poor results, or poor results, really good stuff. And like teams being able to quantify that and like puzzle piece it together, that is probably where the edge is. That seam effects, applying a lot of like I've sometimes said on my channel, like I think the public does a really good job of IDing what should change with a pitcher. I do this a bit on my Substack as well, but you could take someone who's looked at baseball data for a couple of years and be like, can you give me a player plan for this guy? And I think it wouldn't, if you take some of the sharper people online, like I don't think it would look dramatically different than what some orgs give their players. It's just a matter of like the programming side, you know, if the guy needs to get stronger, like what grips to go through, what actually from the biomech side helps him get to like a certain shape at his release. Like what orientations are you going to use alongside that guy who's this kind of mover with this kind of arm action? That is where like the pitfall is on the public side specifically, I would say. But like I can go and look at a pitcher who's underperforming, probably be like, yeah, you know, I try to move the fastball location, bring the fastball usage down. The cutter looks great. You probably need something to bridge to the bigger sweeper against righties. Like you could do this and you're not going to be wrong. It's just the actual implementation down to the field level is what the teams do well, you know, and why coaches are so valuable. I think like the best coaches are the ones that just dominate this stuff and they do it time and time again. And this is why there's all these orgs could have the same info. And then the Brewers and the Rays and the Red Sox do it 20 times better than the Rockies and the Nationals and such. It's like, that's just how it works, man. Like the people who communicate the stuff down to the player are always going to win, I think.
It's so difficult too. And I wrote down here, just like the private sector is, to me, like has exploded, right? Driveline, kind of leading edge. Talk about tread, all the others out there now, and there are so many. Those guys get so many reps, and I think that's why a lot of clubs will go in and like try to identify those guys. I think of John DeRoyan, who's now at Arizona, who had gone out. He was in the Northeast. He had done some great things. Mike Adams, who we've had on the show in South Jersey, but like they get so many reps versus being in the biased arena of like pro baseball. We have the best arms. We're just kind of like not trying to break them, where those guys actually had to build something. They know this and that works. And to like, even more so to your point, they can get it across to the player because they know like the cues to get there. I think that's so fascinating.
It's impressive stuff. Yeah. John spoke at Wake Forest Bridge Conference, the most recent off season. And I was super impressed because I'll admit, like, this is one of my first couple of years. This is probably my second full year where I'm like really in the college data space from March until now, you know?
Yeah.
Prior to that, like I followed the draft, but I did not follow it this closely. So I'm still learning about like all the nuance of college baseball and how teams are good and which orgs are better and like which organization from a collegiate side major league teams look at because they know there's value to capture there because they just don't do X and Y with a given player, especially from like the SNC side or like routine side. It's like, what have you done from weighted ball standpoint, or what have you done from like a biomech capture standpoint, you know? And it's like, oh, not that much, and you don't really use weighted balls that much, and like the dude's 6'4", 220, and it's like, okay, like yeah, he could probably throw 97 if he's sitting 93, you know, like we could get him there. This is that competitive advantage around some of these college teams being targeted just because they're not what Arizona's done, which has been an incredible project by John and those other guys and stuff.
Yeah.
It allows teams to hop in and take advantage.
It's and looking from our aspect, like the identification, the evaluation process, so much more. Like, right, we have all these advanced analytics that we can kind of, and the way that I talk to our org about it is, hey, this will kind of cover your backside, right? We have this data. So like there will be kind of a floor and this will kind of bring us to it. Reaching beyond, hey, what kind of aptitude does this kid have? You were talking about the seam shifting, all sorts of different things. Hey, yeah, that you need to do this, and this to your fastball. Like that's not easy to do. Like a guy who's been thrown from this slot, I was looking at some of your stuff about the different slots and the release heights. It's not easy to change things. It's not easy to be Carlos Rodon and like, hey, I'm so comfortable in the way that I move. And Paul Skeens, especially, like I can do so many things well. Do you think that that's something that teams are identifying? Like this guy's a really good athlete. He can get to this and we may be able to do this versus, hey, you come into our org, you throw a slider, you need to throw a curveball. Like, dude, I don't know how to do that. Is that something guys are identifying?
This is a great point. I think this comes back to something that I've heard a bit and I'm still trying to like wrap my head around, but it's this concept of like hand feel on the pitching side. Specifically, you can tell a lot of my content's around the pitching side. So This is something that's been brought up to me a couple times where it's like the main way it was brought up, actually, I was talking to one director of pitching. He was talking about how a lot of the more modern orgs, like just because of the uncertainty around a lot of the information they're getting. So like, for example, I was talking to like an SEC school the other day and like their TrackMan is just off on extension and release. So like if you're a major league org and you're building a model on what that guy's stuff is, there's the error bars are just going to be larger in terms of your confidence. So this guy was like, listen, I think I want all these guys to get in here and I want to re-ramp them and have them throw a couple innings in a game. Like I need to see them on our systems. I need to have an idea of like how he's spinning the ball, how he's spinning minor league ball, which is different from the college ball, which is different from the major league ball. Like, I got to know all these things such that I can put together a plan. We could go into the offseason so that I know what I'm getting in spring from him. That is like a point that I found very interesting because I think in the past, perhaps a lot of these guys could just get shut down on the pitching side where it's like, oh, your workload's high. It's like, no, if we could get an idea where you are workload wise and we could properly ramp you and throw you in 2 games, that's invaluable to us from like a what do we have standpoint. And this goes back to like being, again, new to the amateur space a little bit in terms of this stuff, like balancing high school and collegiate athletes from the pitching side is really difficult, man. Like I can't imagine. I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of the conversations in war rooms where they're talking through this stuff. Cause like, it's hard to get high school data that's good. Like you're looking at spin traits and release maybe and general velo, but you don't know like anything about the guy. Really. You're going off, you almost have to lean more on scouts. And I think a lot of data driven orgs are just like, I'm more confident in what I can see from this SEC kid who had a 4 ERA, but we project him to have like a low 3s because his stuff is insane. So like, Man, there's a lot of info. Parsing through it is not something I envy for these orders.
Well, luckily you're in our war room, so we could talk about some of the data sets there. But that's something I was talking to one guy about a pitcher, a high school kid, sinker versus four seam, and getting labeled all as four seam. And now, if you're just sitting in a dark room analytically, okay, this is a dead zone fastball. It's like, no, it's not a dead zone fastball. He doesn't know he's throwing a two seam half the time, or the guy who was tagging didn't know kind of some of that stuff. But that's something fascinating, like from the analytics standpoint, like to be in person, which I like to balance both. I love the data because it helps, especially for me, identify stuff that I missed. Like, oh, I completely whiffed on this guy. He does this, this, and this well. Also, what organizations do things really well. Shifting over to kind of some trends that you're seeing in the game, right? You're identifying all these data sets. Where do you see the pitching going? Because in the past, and kind of you talked about the top org, they're on the cutting edge, right? Hey, the game, everybody's going high spin, high spin, high spin until everybody's zigging and these two teams zag. And all of a sudden the sinker comes in. Why are they doing that? Well, all the hitters over the last decade, the amateur space, have adjusted to the high spin, right? They're trying to get above the ball. They're trying to do all those things. None of them are seeing sinkers. Is that what are the things that pitching? Where are we headed?
Yeah, I think at the major league level specifically, I can't really speak to probably more like the collegiate stuff for amateur, but I think what we're going towards is probably like really expanded repertoires with big stuff. So like I'm seeing this a little bit earlier as well. Like some of the college guys I've looked at, like take like Malachi Witherspoon, for example, Kyson's brother, Oklahoma kid. Like he's probably like a second, third rounder. We'll see where he ends up going. People I think that I've talked to really like him. He's a guy that has like a really deep mix. Like he's already 2 fastballs. There's 2 sliders in there. There's like a lot of that, like the makeup of like, you look at his plot and you're like, has he been in a major league org? Because like, this is pretty advanced, you know, compare that to like Michael Lombardi from Tulane. I know I'm going a little deep here, but he's an interesting dude. Yeah, exactly. So he's got like vert fastball. He's just throwing 2 pitches. He threw like 70% fastball, and then he's got a curveball off it. Like it's very different from a development track. Like when you get Malachi in org, like he's already got multiple shapes. Like he represents, I think, where the game is going. You call him like a lower slot, kind of like supinator type. So he's able to get around breaking balls, has good spin feel, can split fastballs, has the ability to get to 2-3 breakers. Could probably throw him some kind of changeup because now we're getting a much better understanding of how like seam shift can influence guys who cut the ball a bit more to get to a proper changeup. In the past, like most of the time, the question was like, oh, I'll never be able to develop a changeup for lefties. And now that's like everyone has a changeup, you know what I mean? Regardless of whether you pronate through or cut the ball. So like that is where I think we're going, is like, I think we're going to see very few guys who can rely on like 2 or 3 pitches. And the teams that are the best at accelerating that and understanding specifically like some of the seam effect stuff, as I mentioned, the Yankee video I did, they're going to have an edge on this stuff. They're going to be able to sign Max Fried and turn him into what they've turned him into because of their understanding of seam effects. Like there's that thing every year where it's like man, if we just had Max Fried in our org, he would be so good. And it's like, listen, he's a great example of like, you wouldn't have gotten this Max Fried because I think probably 2 or 3 teams could have done what the Yankees did, you know, from a seam effect standpoint, flipping to a 1-seam sinker. They got him playing with like a cutter and a 4-seam. It's like he this like weird kick cutter thing he's throwing. It's like they did some really cool stuff. And that is like so high level based off the systems they've built that I don't know what the timeline is for some of the teams that are in the bottom third of MLB in terms of pitching development to catch up to that. You know, like those teams are still trying to figure out how to like not blow out arms when they develop velo, you know, and like maximize stuff. You know, you look at the regime change in Miami, like they've done a great job jumping stuff year over year, but like they're still behind in a variety of ways. And I think they'll admit that as well. It's just going to take 3 to 5 years for them to get up to speed to be able to do what the Yankees are doing.
It's that quote from that Wake conference that you had out there, throw more pitches with simpler plans, be random, which I love. Yeah. And it's something we, especially the youth side, which you haven't been on, but the amateur space now shifting away from like, okay, this guy's got huge vert, power fastball, all that. Hey, no, this kid may be a little undersized. He's going to get stronger. Those are things we can count on. But he already shows the aptitude to separate these pitches. He has this plan, but more so the touch. Well, actually, this is going to be a random question, but the Yankees are always carrying around essentially edgertronics. Watching the amateur space, what are they looking at in the actual pitch grips? What would you want to see from like a 16, 17-year-old, like how he's throwing? What are they actually looking at?
It's a great question. Yeah. So you mentioned I did some work with Driveline. I was there for like a couple months as like a remote video editor right around COVID.
Oh, wow.
And it was a really cool job, actually. Like I loved it. I was like basically working with some of their floor trainers who are honestly now all in Major League Orgs. And I was like the person cutting together, like they'd send me TrackMan, Rapsodo, and Edger and be like, can you cut together this guy's pen? Show me like 2 good sliders, 2 bad sliders. Can you split screen them? So I had like video editing backgrounds. This was very easy for me to do. But I got to look at a lot of this data for the first time and like was asking a good amount of questions and like very curious around like why on certain things and what cues. I haven't worked with enough Edgertronic to know exactly. I would imagine it gets back to what I said earlier though about like hand feel. So the basic angle is probably just like you'll hear a lot of the times as you talk to like major league directors on amateur guys, you'll hear like he's throwing a high school breaking ball where he's just not on the 2 seam trying to throw a sweeper. And it's just a bad sweeper. You know, it's low velo. It's getting a lot of sweep. So like the kid thinks like, oh, 19 sweep on this is crazy, but it's like 76. And it's like, okay, cool. We're going to flip you around, move you. Same with like, I had one person in North tell me like a lot of kids have stupid fastball grips, which is like one of my favorite quotes. Where they're just not centered up on the ball.
I see so many whose fingers are so spread.
Yeah. And like sometimes there's some like hand bias there, and like you could get into like certain guys, like if you cut the ball, maybe you actually want to be a little wider. But like a lot of guys just aren't centered up on the ball. Like the Yankees did this with Luke Weaver, where his 4-seam grip for his entire career was just bad. And they like changed some mechanical stuff and then turned his fastball into like more of a true backspin orientation where he was actually centered on the ball and like just took off. So I would imagine they're trying to get that baseline info of just like, like from my angle, what I mentioned earlier, like you look at a player, I could look at a college player and go, okay, I think he needs X, Y, Z. Like, but what is his present sweeper shape? Like, a good example is Jamie Arnold at the top of the draft. So he throws sweeper like 40-45% of the time left to right. Bit odd. A lot of lawyers I've talked to on him are like, we got to get him to probably some other kind of short breaking ball, which I totally agree with. I just don't think there's many lefties that throw like 40% sweeper to righties as a starting pitcher. Yeah. So one org asked me like, do you know his cutter? Do you know his non-sweeper grip? And I found out that it was literally his sweeper grip without the spike. So it's like, great. That's an opportunity for an org from the edger side. If they got the edger, you know, it's as opposed to asking me about it, but like they can look at the edger and be like, oh, okay, this pitch was 86, like 3 vert, 3 horizontal. That's like a short cutter shape, but he's using his sweeper grip. We have 3 other orientations we generally see with this kind of guy, this kind of mover, this kind of arm path that we think would get to X and Y shape. So I'd imagine it's a lot of that. It's very like granular and specific. Okay. That's my guess is like biomechanics stuff set aside. If there's focusing on like ball release, they're trying to get an idea of like hand feel, what this guy's doing with the ball, what his current orientations are, and then being more confident in the adjustments they then propose in the war room when it's like, what are you doing with him from a player depth standpoint? And it's like, cool, we could do 3-4 things here because we know based on the edger that we got of this. That'd be my approach and my understanding of how that stuff works.
I mean, you can find a lot of value. Hey, this is going to be an easy fix on this guy, and we could get huge value, which is what all the teams are trying to find right throughout the draft. Hey, we can get a lot of value. It's the biggest thing to me is like, and especially you talk about the big mark Dodgers, Yankees, like we're shining up these prospects, and essentially most of them are going to ship out for a good amount because you get, and which is why I think each club kind of has picked like, hey, we're really good at this. Let's develop this. I mean, I think of the Brewers right now, Mizorowski, Logan Henderson, all these guys are just cruising up starting pitchers where, hey, starting pitchers are valuable. We do a good job with them. Let's see what we can do. But sticking on the draft timeline, because you bring up Arnold. I was watching stuff. Liam Doyle is probably the most explosive fastball in this draft class. You're going to talk about him on Sunday. It's huge stuff from New Hampshire, your neck of the woods. Growing up. But versus Kate Anderson, who we have mocked at 1-1, and especially with Rizzo getting fired now, like it kind of opens up some. We'll see what happens. I'm sure you guys will talk about that on the show on Sunday. Compare those two because Doyle has less of an arsenal, right? There's the less pitches. He throws the split. He's got the little cutter going. Whereas Anderson, similar to Fried, where he can really spin the baseball, but the fastball is not quite as explosive. Who's more valuable? Who's the guy you're taking at 1?
Yeah, it's going to be Anderson for sure. I'm not entirely sure. Like, I'm not saying the Nationals are going to take Anderson at 1. I don't know. They seem to be pretty quiet, and this GM stuff's fascinating. Yeah. My lean on this, just purely speculation, would be I'm not entirely sure they would go high school there. Like, I'd be a little surprised if they go like Willits or Holiday because, like, I think they know they need like a minor league dev overhaul. And are you confident you could put that in place to take like a Holiday or someone else? And then bring them in and be like, this is what we want you to do. And then the guy comes in and is like, you guys are overhauling your entire dev side. You know what I mean? Like, do you want me to listen to any of these coaches? Like, what are we doing here? And Ethan Holiday probably has his own guys. So like, maybe you're more confident there, where it's like, just don't listen to us for 2 years and then we'll have people in place. You know what I mean? Use your dad's guys, because like obviously they are cooking on that side with Matt and Jackson and stuff. But anyways, getting back to your point on Cade and Doyle, very different pitchers to me. Yeah, Doyle is interesting because it's hard to analyze the rest of his mix because he threw the fastball so much. It's a great shape. It's going to get beat up a little bit by the major league ball just because it's really efficient and spin, so it has a lot of that vert and also the arm side. The big thing in talking to people about how to analyze a college lefties is like, where do I think the fastball shape's going to go in terms of, how his body traits move, how the ball is going to affect it, where his velo is, et cetera, how good is he as a mover. And the other thing too is like, if it's a lefty, the question jumps up of like, how is he approaching right-handed hitters? Because like, that's going to be 75% of the guys he faces in Major League Baseball.
Yeah. And
that's a great question, because I think that is why you take Cade over Doyle, because right now Cade's mix is fantastic, left to right. I think he has all the exact weapons. Curveball looks good. I'd love to push the velo there. I think that's a broader point that I mentioned around Cade, is like, I'd be curious to see where the velo can get to. But the fastball is good enough to work. I mean, I think the changeup should be used more. I think some people I've talked to in orgs agree with that. Overall, it's a really good pitch. Got a ton of whiff. He just didn't use it a ton. The slider has a good enough shape to work left to right as well. So like, his mix approaching righties is going to give him a general high floor. And I also think the ceiling capture there is more like, man, how good would it look if everything was sitting a tick and a half hotter? Like, he's a smaller framed guy, obviously D1 strength program with LSU. They have some sharp people there. Like, they're obviously like, he's been lifting in season, et cetera. Like, as an org, I'd be very confident in his aptitude and ability to like get in and put on some mass. But that's a big question with him, is like, if you're taking him 1-1, like, he wouldn't go ahead of Skeens and he wouldn't go ahead of Chase Burns. I think there's a pretty good gap there between those three guys, I would say. Like, Skeens being in like the complete 70-80 grade tier. I think Burns is probably more like a 55-60, and I'd say like Cade is probably in that 50-55 window. Okay. Maybe I'll give him a 55 overall, I'd say. Doyle is like, I throw a bunch of fastball. I can't really analyze the rest of the mix because he threw the fastball so much, all the whiff on everything else. I can't tell you if it's because of the raw shape. I think it might just be because everyone was sitting on his fastball because he threw it 65% of the time. But he's going to need something else to go to righties. Some people like the split. It's got a lot of vertical separation and velocity separation off the fastball. Just, again, didn't really use it a ton because he didn't really need to, because the fastball beat everybody up. The intent delivery is a bit high with him. So there is some reliever risk there. I think he's my 4th ranked pitcher. Actually, I really like Gage Wood, and I'm a Jamie Arnold guy. So like, sorting through those 3 lefties is a great question, I think, for a lot of organizations. My guess is a lot of them have Cade Anderson 1, and then I'm fascinated to see beyond that, because I think there's a lot more variance than perhaps the mocks have shown.
I think that, so Gage Wood internally, David Seifert, who's my co-host on this show and does a great job with D1 baseball. Gage Wood was his guy last summer. He started off hurt. And we were talking about the similarities to Cade Horton, who you are now covering, who kind of started the season slow at Oklahoma. His splits were actually not great. Like, he was much better against righties before lefties. He makes a little switch. He explodes, turns in the 7th pick, where we're really talking about that. All of a sudden the Cubs take him. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy's unreal. Gage Wood kind of feels like that guy who could go in a lot of spots throughout the first round.
I agree. I mean, the stuff there is great. I think he has the 2 best breaking balls in the draft, arguably, which is why I like him so much. Like, the curveball is insane. There's no one else who's thrown anything like it. He basically has like the baseline curveball shape, but he's thrown it 3 ticks harder than average. It's like 83. I love the Shane Boz comp, not from a body standpoint, but from what he does with the ball. Flat approach fastball, he throws really hard. The results are mixed. Some orgs, I think, from my understanding, are a little bit concerned around like why he didn't perform better. And the shoulder is obviously some bit of a concern. It sounds like that stuff for him is dated back to high school. The way I rank a lot of this, because I'm not going to delve into this medical stuff, I just assume this is obviously some error in my work, but like, I just assume everybody's probably healthy, and like the draft will tell me if the guy's not. Like Savage kind of fell a little last year. I wonder if that was medical based. And that's how I know. Like, cool. I think that this pitcher is better. If Gage Wood ends up going 26th, then like the rest of the league looked at his medicals and were like, I'm not entirely sure this is going to hold up. But there's also a really good chance everyone looks at that and goes, okay, this is the best stuff in the draft. And how is he going behind some guys who don't have as good of stuff? And it's as simple as that to me. I think he could go anywhere from, I'd be surprised if he cracks the top 10. I think he's in that 11 to 20 window. That's like the sweet spot. And a lot of teams are going to have a tough decision when he's there at like 13 to 16 as to whether they want to take him or go like Kyson or one of these other guys.
We were looking at the Cubs pick at 17, and like there were like spots where it's like, okay, like I don't know, maybe we ended up putting him to the Orioles at 19, but like,
yeah, that's fine. Yep.
It could be in a lot of places, but it's fascinating to see, like, and you've done so much with the pitching, like there's so much value. You have to find those good arms. Let's go a little bit further off the deep end, because that's where my mind always heads. Rule changes. Do you see anything come? Because like injuries, right? The injuries have become such a huge factor. I mean, if you go over to football, what do? They protect the quarterbacks. Got to have the quarterbacks out here. Starting pitchers, to me, it's what people want to come to the game to see, right? Like, I know Scherzer's going against Kershaw tonight. Like, Sunday Night Baseball, I'm turning this on. Max Fried's throwing tonight? Yes. I think is the first thing I do in the MLB app is like, is Skeen's throwing? Okay, I'm going to watch that game. So how do we protect the starters? Do you think there is a certain point where MLB might incentivize health? So like 200 innings, you get a pick, or you get however many guys you throw to. That's something I've been like, hey, anybody throws 200 innings, you get an extra $1 million in the draft. What do you think? What are your ideas?
What are my ideas? I love the idea proposed by Kyle Bodie and Glenn Feisig and some others of increasing the weight of the ball. So obviously a little bit counterintuitive here. This is a really good one. There's some. I'm not going to steal this idea. It's definitely smarter people than I have looked into the reasoning, but it's the same concept of like, if you think of like underload overload training for pitchers, if you're using like a 1 ounce ball or 2 ounce ball or something like that and ripping it, like underload training, you're just trying to move as fast as possible. That's going to provide just more raw torque on your arm for the most part. Whereas the larger ball actually will slow down your arm. So you'd theorize that maybe the injury level drops. The problem is how it would affect hitters and affect shapes and a variety of other things. So that could be a way to just cut a mile per hour off everybody. But
how much?
You got to think of all the unintended
difference?
Consequences.
What weight
I would imagine it's very small. I don't exactly know what they proposed, but I would imagine it's like probably 0.25-ish ounces, maybe a half an ounce. I'm not entirely sure. It's got to be tiny. But yeah, that's a fun one. I love that one. But I think that's maybe a little off the deep end. I love it, but it's off the deep end, partially because of all the things it could affect unintentionally. Like if the league has done all this to get offense back, then they add that, and then no one can hit a ball 440 feet anymore. It's like, I don't know, like someone's got to model how a ball that's slightly heavier would pull back distances, and figure out the calculus of like, is this worth it? So to your point, I think the league could step in with a variety of rules. I mean, you could double hook the starting pitcher. You could provide some incentive, like the double hook being if a guy stays in for a certain amount of time, then you get to keep your DH. If not, that becomes the pitcher spot, for example.
Okay.
Basically would push out the size of benches. Let's say it's guys, if your starting pitcher records 18 outs, you retain the DH for the rest of the game. That's one way to maybe subtly incentivize it, force teams to use more bench, force teams to maybe care a little bit more about lengthening game. That could drive down velo. That's one that I like. I'm not entirely like options and moves. Maybe cut the amount of options guys can go up and down. If you shrink the supply, then you're just going to have guys that can eat more innings. And that, I think, for the most part, will probably skew lower velocity. So those are the two that I think are most likely because they probably are more logistical, don't impact the fan. You could sell it as like, this is going to help the league. And I don't know the unintended consequences are that dire on those. Maybe from a job standpoint, for maybe like the MLBPA is not totally happy with that stuff. But again, this is like when you get to the negotiating table in 26, like I'd be curious to see what's brought up, but I think more like roster limitations, rule changes, things like that could have a positive impact. But as to whether it pushes the probability teams chase velocity down, the answer is no. Like even if we do this stuff, you're just going to figure out how to get a guy to sit 96 for 7 innings. And teams are just going to be like, we need to figure this out now. They're not incentivized to figure it out now because it's easier to just have the guy throw 98 to 100 in a shorter stint. So like that's what's prized for the most part. You got to provide some incentive for them to be like, cool, like let's figure out how to get this guy sitting harder velo for longer. And then maybe that changes training regimes in the minors, prioritize the starting pitcher. Because I totally agree. Like, do you see the viewership on Mizorowski Skeens was fantastic. Like, I've thought this for a while. It's the reason I watch games, go to ballparks. Maybe I'm not the average fan. I know baseball is a very regional sport, but if you're looking at the national audience that a lot of other sports have absolutely dominated, think of basketball and football, like they're doing it right. And if you want to try to compete on the national stage, that's how you're going to do it.
Incentive is incentivizing the teams to do some stuff. I think is like the easiest way to get, especially think about a small market team. Like hey, we got to get how many 6 innings? Okay, if we get 4 200 inning guys, all of a sudden we can get these 4 extra picks. We're getting this value versus.
I like the pick idea. That's kind of fun. I wonder where that would slot in, because they did it with Rookie of the Year, right? That was like a pretty easy way for them to figure out the playing time incentive. From like sending guys down, etc.
I wonder.
But then again, it just kind of moved the needle, right? Where like all the guys are now coming up really late to get a cup of coffee and then be eligible next year for the Rookie of the Year. So,
well, this is super recent. I was watching a Yankee game last. Will Warren, who had a good start to the year from Southeastern. I went to school at Tulane, so I've been following him. But he gives up like 8. He is having his worst start. And like the Yankees had played like 8 straight days. So he's essentially going to wear it, which very rarely happens. Even at the youth level, like you go 2 guys on, you see the pitcher looking over, like, okay, time for me to come out. Hey, roll the inning, right? Like all this stuff is going on. It's like, hey, Will Warren, we need you to kind of get into the 5th inning here. We know it's 8-0. And like that, seeing that come back, like, hey, yeah, I'm going to give up 4 runs. I'm not going to give up 5. I'm going to give up 5, not 6, or whatever it may be. But like, hey, how am I going to get to this next line? Which ties us right back to having more pitches. And like, how do I get through like, right? Like this I'm going to go fastball, change up this at bat. Next time I'm going to go sinker, slide, or like, hey, going through and actually having a plan versus like, hey, I'm going full Prefontaine as hard as I can go right from the start and see how far it lasts,
And it makes that, honestly, it's totally right. I like that tie back, and I think that's why I bring it up on the depth of mix side. I think that's probably the incentive long term, is like the ability to just use different pitches to different hitters and make yourself more versatile in terms of usage. That's probably what teams find as valuable, But yeah, I'm curious to see what happens in that respect, and like how much it actually catches on and becomes a thing that everybody's doing. I'm losing my train of thought, but I remembered it very briefly here. The thing I was going to say was like, it makes it more fascinating when you have a guy who's throwing 2 pitches 90% of the time succeeding. Like that is fascinating. Like Hunter Green is a pretty reduced mixed pitcher.
Yes.
And I remember when he came up, everyone was kind of poo-pooing the fastball shape. And I was like, I don't know, man. He sits 98. Like, I think he's just, young and off, perhaps, in terms of his command. But he throws basically 2 pitches, and he's been one of the best pitchers in the NL. I know he's on the IL right now, but beginning there, he was fantastic. So, like, those guys are kind of fascinating to me. It's like, well, why can that guy work versus either handedness with 2 pitches? But, Max Fried needs 8 pitches to be a sub-3 ERA pitcher overall. Like that balance is interesting. So maybe we get a pullback in 10 years where it's like, no, we need this particular slider shape thrown 45% of the time to either handedness. That's how you get it, actually, because like that guy throwing that pitch over and over will then build up command quicker than the guy trying to throw 6 pitches, So it's going to be the circle of life.
Well, it's fascinating too. Hunter Green, like I can remember his draft year in high school. Like you're never as big in your own backyard, and all the SoCal other coaches like, oh, his fastball gets hit. His fastball gets hit.
That's what everybody says. Yeah, I know. It's pretty good, man. I don't know. He's sitting 99, blowing it by people.
Exactly. I have to give it and this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on because I know you got so much stuff going on, especially with the draft coming up. I have to give you the idea that I've been throwing out for years, and coming back around. We talk about the different pitch profiles, the different arm slots, and changing it relative to the approach of the hitter. And I've been like curious, like when that's going to come. And I keep bringing it up. I'm like, I think it'll come from Asia. Like I think a Japanese player may come in and see like, hey, this guy hunts here. Judge is doing this. Soto's doing this. I'm going to drop my slot, which I know will allow this pitch profile and pitch shape to basically go after his weaknesses. Do you see that? Do you think that can happen?
It's a good idea. I mean, I think that the limitation I've always heard on it is like, it's not necessarily something teams are chasing, partially because like most of the time they're just trying to get the guy to like command the ball generally. And I don't even think a lot of orgs have the ability to train that well. Reliably is probably the proper word. So I struggle to think that like a team's going to start coaching a guy into different slots. I also, perhaps it's a risk thing too. Like I'm not entirely sure how that would impart different strain on the body for a pitcher. Like I'm not entirely sure, but that has to have some calculation into things from a biomech standpoint of like, actually, if he's doing this, he's using more shoulder, like think about like raising your arm above your head and holding it higher relative to your torso. Like you're going to activate more shoulder. Again, I'm not a biomechanics guy. This is just me rattling some random stuff, but I imagine that has some influence on it. So I would say I like the idea in concept, but I wonder whether the value capture is more just in what you're talking about, like teams doing a better job understanding what shapes work to specific hitters and becoming way more process driven on the game planning side of things. So for a while, I've like said this on Twitter too, and I'm sure a lot of people have the idea as well, but catchers, I always think that we still don't capture everything a catcher does. Like we have WAR and we had a framing adjustment a couple years ago, and we think that's mostly correct, but I would argue they have like some hidden intangible value that's worth probably around a WAR for the best guys, maybe more, maybe less, whatever. That goes into managing a pitcher, game calling, and all these things, and like how good you are at prep. And I wonder whether we get to a point where there's some really good objective systems in organizations that are doing a much better job on like the usage modeling side. And I know most teams probably have a usage model, but I'm talking like very specific usage modeling, like versus this path in these situations, we think you could get away with X and Y. And like being able to use this in a situation with a pregame meeting, pitcher, catcher, pitching coach, assistant pitching coach, whatever. And then you have data guy in there, and the data guy's like, listen, like Cal Raleigh, I know you've called X in this spot for George Kirby over the last 2 years, but like, or let's say 5 starts, but it's like, we're facing Yordan Alvarez and Jose Altuve. We think they have certain paths that are susceptible to your cutter, which you really haven't thrown. Like, think about that in these spots. Like, I think this stuff is happening. I just wonder how objectively it's happening. Like, are they coming up, or do they have a data guy in there that's spitting out like, hey, based on like decay, like how much you use this pitch in this AB, if you want to throw Yordan 7 cutters in his first 2 ABs, that's going to affect the property of that cutter going into the third AB. That stuff, the more granular like nuance of like what to throw when based on how much you've thrown it to that guy is something I wonder if teams are going to start poking on. That does more of what you're saying in a way, right? Like you're saying changing arm angles looks. I'm saying a very similar thing just through usage and using what we now have in the bat path data side of things to reconcile it all. So
that's fascinating. Like I look at the randomness factor. I'm always like, there's so many
that's what I'm talking about here. The game
theory, like you have to go random, and it's almost. I'm sure I know like Maddox, like without all this stuff, was thinking these things way back, but now the same way you're talking about Cal Raleigh sitting down with George Kirby, they're going over a report. On the other team, the hitters are getting a report like, this is how this guy's going to work you. This is your hole. This is what works against.
Exactly.
So you're looking for that. How do you randomize that? And then setting up, it goes back to full old school. Like, how am I going to set you up for the last at bat for next week?
That's exactly that's where I think the edge is in like the objectifying that rather than just like thinking you have it. Like I would argue like there's probably a variety of pitchers in baseball that have that it factor that can do that better than others. And maybe that's why you see some guys overperform like their underlying stats. But I just wonder whether there's an objective way to do it that's even better. Like if your catcher's not great at this, then like you should be probably leaning more on data here than using him to call the game, especially like your backup catcher, for example. Like your 2 catcher goes down, you bring up the guy from AAA. Like you got to really use that guy in a way that allows you to capture as much of George Kirby's value, for example, as possible. But yeah, maybe that just makes the catcher even more valuable. Like if there's a catcher out there that is very like data driven on this stuff and loves thinking about this and is in their head knowing like when they go back and watch between innings, if after they hit or whatever, that's obviously gonna mess things up. But like, okay, we threw Yordan 5 cutters here. Our model generally says after the 6th or 7th cutter, George's cutter expected run value drops a lot. Like that fall off's big. So like, how do we buy back his cutter performance? Like what can we throw? Like, do we just use it in 2 strike counts? Do we use it 0-0 and then don't go back to it at all? Like, what is the most risk-reward balanced attack versus Yordan this 3rd time? That stuff. I love thinking about.
Chess game. It's a full-on chess game. And then, like, not to mention, I'm thinking like some teams are like, hey, we're playing these guys, and then we go on this, and then we play them again. So now you could even be thinking a week in advance of like, all right, Yordan's here. This is what we have to throw because next week he's going to be up and it's going to be a day game and whatever it may be. But we are going down a complete rabbit hole, which I would love to do again. Hopefully, I don't know if it's going to be the Wake pitching lab or if Moose is taking it over to Duke.
That'll be interesting. Yeah.
But I'm really excited. I'm going to go this year. So hopefully you're there again. We'd love to link up with you.
For sure. And great.
Lance Brozdowski, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Good luck this weekend. I will be glued.
Thank you.
Hopefully you got a nice suit picked out, a little tie action. Yeah.
I'm still debating on the tie, but yeah, I go with this blue suit that I really like. So
okay, it looks sharp. It looks sharp on TV. Yeah. Well, and everybody out there, the draft July 13th. Make sure you check out Lance on MLB Network, along with some wonderful insight that the great Dr. David Cipher and I will have on here. Check out Twitter. But until next time, this has been an episode of the War Room, and we will see each and every one of you at the ballpark.